Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, an American serial killer, said, "We've all got the power in our hands to kill, but most people are afraid to use it. The ones who aren't afraid control life itself." Starkweather, along with his 14-year-old girlfriend, Carol Ann Fugate, murdered 11 people between December 1st, 1957 and January 28th, 1958. All but one during a 2-month road trip through Nebraska and Wyoming. Written by Michael Thomas Berry in Crime Magazine, December 1st, 2012. Charles Starkweather was a 19-year-old boy who embarked on a killing spree beginning in 1957. Today we will discuss Charles Starkweather's childhood, the number of lives that he claimed, and his capture. According to Charles Starkweather, biography, updated January 14, 2016, Charles Starkweather was born November 24th, 1938 in Lincoln, Nebraska. He had the parents Guy and Helen, and he was the third of 7 children. Helen was the sole provider, and Guy was between jobs. They were poor, but he was not deprived. According to YouTube video, Charles Starkweather, Live Fast, Die Young, published in July 27, 2012, while Charles' early childhood memories were very pleasant, his school experiences were traumatic for him. Charles suffered from severe myopia, which is nearsightedness. He had a speech impediment and bowed legs, but rather than being bullied, he became the one that bullied and that others feared. Starkweather idolized James Dean and developed into a moody, ego-driven, defensive troublemaker who had little control over his quick temper and brewing rage. That was according to the profile of Charles Starkweather by Charles Montaldo. Charles also had an average IQ, but he was a slow learner. So he dropped out of school at 16 to work as a lorry loader at a local newspaper. Charles was frustrated with his life and he felt he had no future, but what future he would have would be with Carol Ann. According to Charles Montaldo, profile of Charles Starkweather. As a result of his traumatic childhood and frustration with his financial situation, Charles felt his only hope at financial gain was to commit crime. According to the Encyclopedia of the Great Plains, Starkweather Charles, 1938 through 1959, by David Wishart, in Charles' mind, Carol Ann finally gave him something worth killing for, thus beginning a string of killing over the next 2 months. On November 30th, Charles Starkweather went to a gas station to buy a gift for his girlfriend Carol Ann. He didn't have enough money, so he had asked the attendant if he could put it on credit. When he was denied, he became filled with rage and left the gas station. Charles then waited outside of the gas station and kind of stalked out the attendant. And then the next day, on December 1st, 1957, Charles went back to the gas station, abducted, robbed, and shot Robert Culver. It wasn't until a month later, on January 21st, that Charles claimed the next lives. He arrived to Carol Ann's house and got into a fight with Carol Ann's mother. At this time, he shot her, then shot his stepfather, Marion Bartlett, and then following the shooting of Marion Bartlett, he stabbed and killed her sister, Betty Jean. Carol Ann and Charles then hid the bodies in various places outside and then lived in the house together for the next 6 days. It was then that Carol Ann's grandmother became suspicious and had called the police, but before the police could arrive, they had taken off and headed to Bennett, Nebraska. Charles drove to Bennett and went to one of his family friends' house of August Meyer. They shot August and then stole his car. As they were trying to get away, they had got stuck in the field in a field of mud. So they got out on foot and started walking when they were stopped by local teens Robert Jensen and Carole King. This was when Charles sexually assaulted Carole King and then shot both Robert Jensen and Carole King and put them in a storm shelter before taking their car and heading back to Lincoln, Nebraska. As they were driving back to Lincoln, they had decided that they would try and find a wealthy neighborhood so they could get some money, and arrived to the residence of C. Lauer and Clara Ward. Clara Ward was at the house with their maid Lillian. This was when Charles and Carol Ann shot Lillian and Clara and then waited for C. Lauer to arrive home. When he got there, they also claimed his life and took jewelry and loaded up the car and took off, heading to Wyoming. They were worried about it being a hot car and the police looking out for the car since it was from a wealthy man. So they saw that there was an insurance salesman that was parked and sleeping in his car on the side of the road in Wyoming. This car belonged to Merle Collison, so instead of waking him up, Charles went up to the car, shot him, and then got into his car and tried to drive away. The car kept stalling, and at this time, there was a passerby who had stopped to see if he could help Robert, as there were two cars that were sitting there. So now that we've covered the murders, let's talk about what happened next. It was Joe Sprinkle who stopped to help. Charles threatened him with his shotgun, and they got into a struggle. At this time was when the police had driven by, and as soon as he got out of his car, Carol Ann ran out of the car screaming, "It's Starkweather, he's trying to kill me." This was when Charles took off in the car, and the police officer had called for backup, and they created a roadblock between Douglas at the Douglas County line. Charles blew through the roadblock and sent the cops on a high-speed chase. When the police had shot out Charles Starkweather's back window and glass had sprayed all over in the window was when Charles started bleeding and decided to stop. He was all out of ammunition, but he did not get out of the car. It took several demands from the police officers and threatening with their weapons before he got out and surrendered to the police. Charles was arrested for first-degree murder in Wyoming. The governor in Wyoming was against capital punishment, so instead of going on trial in Wyoming, he was returned to Nebraska on January 31st, and his trial began in May of that year. He was executed June 25th, 1959. So today we discussed the life and choices of Charles Starkweather. First, we talked about his childhood. Next, we talked about the murders that he committed within 2 months. And then lastly, we covered his surrender, capture, and fate. So again, I leave you with this. We've all got the power in our hands to kill, but most people are afraid to use it. The ones who aren't control life itself.